In this clip I want to talk about something that's not very much in vogue today, and that is encounter groups. Back in the 1960s, they were certainly mid-60s, they were very popular, and my first experience with encounter groups was in Esalen on the Big Sur in Southern California on the coast. And by chance, through friends, I ended up there and spent a few days at the Esalen Institute, which was a place where people came from all over America and from the world, and they would form into groups, and they would then have encounter sessions where maybe a couple would be asked to stand up and then walk to each other and then spontaneously react to whatever situation they felt they found themselves in or thought they were in. And one couple, a young boy, a Jewish boy from New York, and another one from New York, they were chosen, and as they got closer to each other, suddenly the young man lashed out and smacked the woman so hard around the face. And the woman just collapsed on the floor, crying. And afterwards, during the discussion, the woman revealed that this was a wonderful moment for her, because she was a hard-bitten woman, a New Yorker, who was tightly controlled and embittered in many ways. And suddenly all that frustration, anger, all the feelings she had was released, and she felt cleansed in some way. And for the young man, had a very dominant mother, and that's what he'd seen, and he reacted to that. He felt so angry within himself. And this was my experience, my first experience of encounter. And when I came back to England back in '69, I set up my own group and had a group of people, and which I called the Natural Theatre Company, and where we began to work on psychological issues. And during that time there were a lot of other people working, and some of them I felt were extremely dangerous. And I remember one practitioner from America who was organising encounter groups, and a friend of mine went along, and they were asked to form into lines, and which they did, and he was 2 lines, and he was facing an extremely attractive young lady, and their side of the group was asked to walk across the floor, go to the person opposite, and say exactly what they felt about the person in front of them. So he went across and immediately began to tell her how beautiful she was and attractive and what lovely eyes, and etc, etc, etc. And said a lot of very positive, nice things about her. And after a few minutes, they were then asked to stand back, and then the other side were asked to come forward, and she came forward and she looked at him and said, "You know, you disgust me, you give me an awful feeling, there's something about you that really I dislike, and you make me sick," and began a whole lot of negatives, and he felt absolutely destroyed. And he was completely shattered and upset by this onslaught, and she was evidently displacing a whole lot of negative feelings that she felt onto him. And when the session felt, there was no follow-up, no looking or after people, and he left the session very, very damaged. And he remained damaged for years after that, and found it very difficult to have really good relationships with women. And I think this was very sad. And there were a lot of those sorts of encounter groups, and it taught me a valuable lesson that whatever work you were doing with encounter and working in that way, you really have to ensure that people are protected. And so I learned my craft with my natural theatre group, and we worked slowly, and I began to understand about the group dynamics, how groups worked. Because my first initial introduction into encounter groups, just before Essendon, was with Ted Hicks in Vancouver, and he was experimenting, and he had about 25 of us, 30 of us in a room, and he asked us to close our eyes and said, keep our eyes closed as long as possible, and then begin to explore the room, which was quite large, and then see how things develop. Well, for the first hour I spent my time going around the walls and feeling the walls and exploring the environment. And I could hear other people who began like I did, exploring the environment, and then began to explore each other, and then there was laughter and giggles and games and people running around, and they seemed to be having so much fun. And it was the first time that I had become aware that I was an outsider, that I couldn't integrate within this group. And for some reason I just found a door with my eyes shut and opened the door, left the room and went downstairs to another room to reflect and to think and about myself and what was happening to me, when a voice suddenly said, keep your eyes closed, Martin, and I think we need to go back. And it was Ted Hicks, and he took me back into the room, and that was a great discovery for me, and I felt totally protected. I totally trusted Ted Hicks, and from that day I began to understand the position of being an outsider. Yeah, and so encounter groups can be very informative and give a good insight into who and what you are, and some of the problems. So when I started my first serious encounter group in Bristol, one of the things that I did was to ensure that there was safety, and a whole lot of people came together, strangers, and joined my workshop. And for months and months and months, every week they would turn up and they would begin to explore issues. And I realised that my role was a facilitator, not directing, was to allow the group security and an environment in which they could explore issues that were pertinent to them, and work them out within the group where they felt safe. And they developed a very, very strong bond. Such issues would come up. One of the girls was had a real problem with periods, and that was brought up with the group, and the pain and whatever, and the group ritualised this, and I remember them carrying the blood and all going round in a circle, and intonations, and blessing it and saying what a wonderful thing this was, and transforming it into something very, very positive. After a year of working and being very successful, the group then said they would like to introduce someone else, and I was absolutely not very happy with this. But the group made their own decision, and they brought in this woman, and she was totally and utterly negative. She came into the group, and within 2 weeks she had destroyed the group through arguments, through manipulation, through game playing, and being totally negative about everything that was going on. And the only way that we could get rid of the group was, unfortunately, was to dissolve the group entirely. I later learned that she would go round all sorts of different groups, and totally negative. But it taught me a lesson about groups and people, and it was from this that I developed the Sociodrama Handbook, and realised how important it was that if you're going to facilitate a group, you need real knowledge, you need real experience, and you need to understand that if you're going to put people in encounters, they need to feel secure and safe, and you need to know what is going on. And unfortunately encounter groups are no longer in vogue, or people are not fashionable, and so very few around. But they can be a very valuable tool to allow people to explore themselves. Thank you.